Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. This is Bloomberg Businessweek with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Whirlpool, the company maintaining its full-year financial outlook despite uncertainty over global tariffs, saying their long-term impact will benefit its position in the U.S. home appliance market. We are so delighted to have back with us Marc Bitzer. He's the CEO of Whirlpool Corporation. He joins us from Michigan. Marc, it is great to have you here with Tim and myself. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back.
How is the environment?
Well, obviously you saw in our earnings release, we're, despite everything else going on, we're pretty pleased with our Q1. We're basically, I would consider our business largely on track. We hit the EPS pretty much in line with consensus. Our organic revenues were up 2%, almost 6% margin, which puts us on track to our full year guidance. And we're reconfirming guidance. So, obviously it's not all euphoric, but given everything else going on, I think we should feel pretty good about being on track in the current environment.
How would you describe the U.S. consumer right now?
Yeah, obviously, it's been a lot of volatility also on the consumer side. And I think if you want to say so, we're probably a little bit of a canary in the coal mine when it comes to consumer confidence. And the reason why I'm saying this one, every day, many companies have a big order pipeline. Our orders are pretty much 7 days. So I see it pretty fast if a consumer orders something or not. And we saw actually a very healthy consumer sentiment following the election pretty much through January, mid-February, and then we saw a clear deterioration of consumer confidence, in particular on the discretionary side of demand. Okay. And I think that continued to also in Q2. So we see right now the consumer probably lacks confidence about their financial future and they're holding back discretionary purchases.
Well, how does that compare with where consumers have been during your tenure at Whirlpool? Because we've spoken to you quite a bit over the last few years, through ups, through downs, through relatively calm periods. How would you describe the consumer right now relative to where the consumer has been during your tenure?
Yeah, Tim, I've been 26 years, so probably we don't have enough time to go give you all the ups and downs.
But is it better than but that gives us a great view. Is it better than the financial crisis? Better than the dot-com bust? Better than COVID?
How should I put it? From an economic perspective, it doesn't, not from a human perspective, from an economic perspective, I think there's a lot of similarities to what we saw in the early days of COVID. And what I'm saying with one, consumers, it's just, there's everyday new messages which don't necessarily help consumer confidence. So from a pure consumer confidence perspective, we just want to have stability in the message. I think consumers can deal with good or bad news. It's just the everyday changing news and the uncertainty, which neither helps business investors or consumers. And I think, so the drop which we've seen kind of in the course of 6 weeks, that was probably among the biggest drops I've seen. Now, hopefully at one point it will also come back up again. But right now the drop was pretty fast and pretty drastic.
So we love talking with you. We've gone through so many cycles together. And I'm just thinking of those who are watching and listening to Bloomberg Businessweek on this Wednesday. I am curious about your supply chain. Like, we are all getting a great lesson, right, in global trade, global supply chains. Tell us about your supply chain. And how the U.S., China, or just the U.S. tariff trade war is potentially impacting you or making you change it.
First of all, Carol, I want to give you credit, but it took you to question 3 to raise the word tariff. So.
I'm trying.
Kudos to you.
It's not easy.
And obviously, there's a lot of moving parts at play. Ultimately, it comes back to we are kind of the only and last American appliance company, and we produce 80% of what we sell in the U.S. And of what we produce in the U.S., more than 80% of our parts are sourced in the U.S. So we are a domestic producer. I know a lot of companies talk about reshoring or onshoring. We never left, okay? And that's a big difference. So as such, even though we're also faced with some headwinds, in particular on components, et cetera, ultimately, we will be a net winner because we're a domestic producer. And in this case, and this is different from other industries, there's capacity. We have enough capacity in our factories to fill them. And I appreciate other industries, it may take some time, but I think ultimately, and we all don't know what the final picture of the tariffs is, but something will be there. And we do see us benefiting from this one.
How do you want to see this trade war play out? Because I'm assuming that some of these tariffs help you domestically.
Well, and again, I think that probably needs a little bit of explanation. So Carol, actually, we're We're not asking for exemptions. We're not asking for tax subsidies or gifts or handouts or whatever. There are right now in the pre-existing so-called 232 and 301 tariffs, there are loopholes which hurt us, and they structurally benefit Asian producers. And it's put it in simple terms, because of the 232 tariffs, I pay in the US for steel 2 or 3 times more than Asia steel. And any component which I can't get in the US, like a LED panel, I pay tariffs. So if the same product is produced in Vietnam or Korea, they don't have to pay the tariffs on steel. They don't have to pay the tariffs of components. That difference is big. It's about $70 per product. So put that in retail price, that basically means $150 different retail price. So all we ask for is just close the loophole. We're all in support of having a strong US-based steel production. I think we all agree it's important. Just close the loophole. That's all we ask for. So we don't ask for special treatment. Just close the loophole. Take the disadvantage away. Again, I'm not looking for an unfair advantage. We're just looking for a level playing field. And then when we can compete very well.
So we're talking, of course, with Marc Bitzer. He is Chief Executive Officer at Whirlpool Corporation, joining us from Michigan. One thing I want to ask you, what you have learned about manufacturing in the United States, is there a lesson or something, a message you'd like to share with other folks who are saying, I can't manufacture in the United States?
And again, it's, Carol, as you can probably tell from my accent, I have a dual citizenship, American and German. So to sit here and say I'm staying here for patriotic reasons is probably not credible. U.S. production can be working well, and I'm proud of our 10 strong factories in the U.S. And if you go to a factory like in Clyde, Ohio, where you have 3 generations of factory workers, these are proud people who have worked very hard. So I know there's now a lot of jokes about U.S. manufacturing. You can produce in the U.S., and there's a very good skilled workforce which you can have, as long as we don't harm ourselves with kind of issues which make production more difficult in the US, like steel price and component costs. So I know some people are hesitating about moving back to US. We have been producing in the US for 114 years with success.
So, I'm curious about, since you already produce here in the US and you have 80% of the production that goes to the US actually being made here, plus you source a lot of the parts here, you're relatively unaffected by tariffs. Would you say that the tariffs that the Trump administration has proposed or is even putting on have been a net benefit for your business?
It's again, so far there's more announcements than already actually in place. So far what is in place is the 232 and the 10% tariffs. But I go back to, and I know there's a lot of talk about what the previous Trump administration did, the 201 tariffs in 2018, because I know there's a lot of talk about did they raise prices or not. If you now today look back, these tariffs were put in place in 2018 and where we are today, washer prices today are lower than they were in 2014. So tell me one product category which has lower prices than 2014. And compared to 2018, there's 2 more factories producing washers in the US. So from that perspective, what the prior Trump administration did, actually in our industry worked. It brought new production and the prices did not raise. Now, there's always some moving parts as you go through this one, but it worked. Now, that may be different in other industries, but I think I know our industry pretty well. You add production capacity that ultimately will benefit the consumer.
Does the risk, though, of declining U.S. consumer sentiment as a result of rising prices in other categories and concerns about uncertainty moving forward, does that weigh to a greater extent than the benefit that you get from tariffs as a U.S. producer of products?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. Of course, in the short term, there will be, call it wobbliness along the way. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, consumer confidence can drop fast, but it can also increase pretty fast. We've seen that in Q4. So I would say, what I describe on a structural capacity, these are long-term effects. You don't build factories on wheels. You build them for 30 or 50 years.
Yeah.
Consumer confidence moves within a quarter. So I think even though there may be some volatility in consumer confidence, I think the long-term benefits will clearly outweigh the negative short-term consumer sentiment.
Marc, you definitely have a global perspective. I think there's some concerns, though, that the longer this trade back and forth, especially between the United States and China, but really between the U.S. and the world, that there will be long-term damage. How do you see it?
Well, it's again, I can speak more for my industry. I think ultimately what the current administration is trying to do in our industry, I support, of course, because we're a U.S. producer. Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing, and that is not only for our industry, people just want to have predictability. Okay, if you have pretty much every day a changing problem definition, that just makes it hard, because you don't plan industrial production, you don't make industrial decisions if you don't know if that assumption is true tomorrow. So I think everybody will deal with whatever it is if they know this is now, that's a picture and it's going to be stable and people can count on this one. So I think it's more stability and predictability more than anything else, which I would be hoping for. You
mentioned that much of the sourcing that you do for the US-based production is actually domestic sourcing. Still, I imagine there are components that are made outside of the US. Do you anticipate any supply chain issues as a result of what we've seen happening?
Yeah, and it's a little bit, and part of that is today our disadvantage, because there are, as you point out, some components I can't buy in the US, like an LED panel for a washer and that kind of stuff. So today we have to pay tariffs, while anybody producing Thailand, Vietnam doesn't have to pay tariffs.
Right.
I think over time, I would expect that for the vast majority of these components, over time, there will be supply base either in US or in Mexico. And we see already some early indications. It will take its time, in particular in the electronic side more than anything else, but more of the mechanic parts like motors, etc. I think it will be quickly resolved.
All right, I just want to know, have you created a dishwasher that my husband and I don't have to argue over who's going to load it and unload it? I just want to know, do you have one like that, a robotic one that actually unloads and unloads? Have we gotten there?
Yeah, well, if you have a patent, let me know, and we can hire you as an engineer. First of all, I pride ourselves. We have the best dishwasher with the biggest capacity in the industry. Unfortunately, it doesn't load itself. I feel the same pain every day at home. Not every day. At least I'm accused of that every day.
Hey, listen, one last question. Do we have to be worried about a global recession? Is that anything that's on your radar, just real quickly?
I mean, again, that's why I said, Carol, earlier, it feels a little bit economically to step back to earlier days of COVID and whatever else.
Yeah.
It's just an uncertain outcome. I think right now the odds of a recession have increased. I'm not quite sure we're all the way there. It depends a lot what happens in the next 2-3 weeks in terms of business predictability. But I think we're living with an uncertain outcome, and that's what our job is to manage towards that.
All right. Well, when I get that design for that dishwasher that loads and unloads itself, I'll let you know. Marc Bitzer, be well, CEO, Whirlpool Corporation.